My name is Evelyn Reed. I'm 65 years old, and my world was shattered by a phone call my son forgot to end. Before I tell you how I sold everything I owned and vanished without a trace, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all started on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon in October. The autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of orange and red outside my Chicago apartment window, and I was doing what I did every Tuesday, calling my son, Mark, to confirm our weekly Sunday dinner. It was our ritual, a tradition I held onto tightly ever since my husband, Richard, passed away. The call was brief, normal. "Hey, Mom," Mark said, his voice a little distracted. "Yeah, Sunday is still on. Listen, someone's at the door, I gotta go. Talk later." "Okay, sweetie. Love you," I said. "Love you too," he replied, and then I heard a distinct clatter. Not the click of a disconnected call, but the sound of a phone being placed on a hard surface. He hadn't hung up. I waited, thinking he'd realize his mistake and end the call. A few seconds of silence passed. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. I was about to hang up myself when another voice cut through the air. A voice I knew all too well. It was my daughter-in-law, Tiffany, and the sweetness she usually coated her words with when speaking to me was gone. What was left was pure acid. "Was that your mother again?" she asked. The word mother dripped with a kind of weary disgust, as if I were a stain she couldn't quite scrub out. I froze, my hand hovering over the end call button. I shouldn't listen. It was wrong. But I couldn't move. Mark let out a heavy sigh, the kind I hadn't heard since he was a teenager forced to do his chores. "Yeah, Tiff. Just confirming Sunday." "Ugh," Tiffany groaned. "When are we going to tell her? I can't take another one of those torturous dinners. Her boring stories, her little comments about how we're raising Lily and Leo. Mark, I'm serious. It's unbearable. Unbearable." The word hit me like a physical blow. I sank into the armchair next to the phone table, the receiver suddenly feeling cold and heavy in my hand. My weekly dinners, the one thing I looked forward to all week, were torture to them. "I know, Tiff. I know," my son, my only child, replied, his voice placating. "It's complicated." "No, it's not," she snapped back. "It's a simple case of setting boundaries. We're a family of 4, not 5. Besides, she lets the kids get away with everything. She's undermining us." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was what they said behind my back. This was what they really thought of me. A nuisance. A burden. But the worst was yet to come. I heard the rustle of what sounded like papers, and Tiffany's voice lowered conspiratorially. "Speaking of which, have you thought any more about the Tahoe cabin?" My blood ran cold. The cabin. Richard and I had built that cabin with our own hands. It was our sanctuary, the place where every happy memory lived. After his funeral, it became the one place I felt his presence. It was my most precious possession, not for its monetary value, but for the life we had lived there. Mark hesitated. "What about it?" "Well," Tiffany said, her voice smooth as silk, "we're the ones who use it most of the time anyway. We're the ones making memories there with the kids now. It's just sitting empty most of the year." I could barely breathe. What was she suggesting? "It's part of your inheritance, of course," she continued. "But why wait? It would make things so much easier for our finances if the deed was in our name. We could even take out a loan against it to finish the basement." Then came the final gut-wrenching blow. The words that would echo in my mind for years to come. "Let's be honest, Mark," Tiffany said with a dry, dismissive laugh. "She's old. What does she need a whole cabin for anyway? It's better off with us." A wave of nausea washed over me. Old. Useless. A resource to be tapped, an obstacle to be managed. They weren't just planning to push me out of their lives. They were planning on carving up my life, my memories, my future, and serving it up for their own convenience. I heard my son, the boy I had worked 2 jobs to send to college after his father died, the man whose every scraped knee I had kissed better, take a breath. I prayed he would defend me. I prayed he would tell his wife she had gone too far. But all that came out of his mouth was a single soul-crushing word. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You're probably right." The silence in my apartment was a physical thing after that one quiet word from my son. Yeah, it wasn't just a word, it was a verdict. A confirmation. In that single syllable, 30 years of my life, of my singular focus as a mother, were dismissed as an inconvenience. The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had comforted me for decades, now seemed to be counting down the seconds of my old life. The loop began in my head, their voices echoing in the sudden emptiness of my home. Unbearable. Torture. She's old. What does she need it for? My mind, as if to protect itself from the present, fled to the past. It landed on a cold November morning 30 years ago, in a sterile hospital waiting room. A doctor with tired eyes had knelt in front of me and told me that Richard, my Richard, the love of my life, was gone. A massive sudden heart attack. One moment he was complaining about the leaky faucet, the next he was a memory. The world didn't just end for me that day. It imploded, leaving me in a black hole with one tiny flickering star. My 10-year-old son Mark, who was clinging to my side, his small body trembling. In that moment I made a vow. I swore on Richard's grave, on my own shattered heart, that this boy would never want for anything. I would be his father and his mother. I would be his shield. My grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. My life was no longer my own. It was his. And I kept that vow with a fierce, almost fanatical devotion. I sold our beautiful 2-story house in the suburbs, the one with the big oak tree Richard had planted, because I couldn't manage the mortgage on my single salary. We moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with thin walls where you could hear the neighbors arguing. I took on a second job. My days were a respectable blur of paperwork and parent-teacher conferences at the elementary school where I worked as an administrator. But my nights belonged to the anonymous office building downtown. I can still smell it, the sharp chemical scent of industrial cleaner, the lingering odor of stale coffee from 100 discarded paper cups. I can still feel the ache in my lower back from pushing a heavy-duty vacuum cleaner, and the sting of bleach on my hands. I'd get home after midnight, my body screaming with exhaustion, and creep into Mark's room just to watch him sleep, his face so peaceful. It was for him. All of it. I remember one year, for his 14th birthday, all he wanted was this ridiculously expensive video game console that all his friends had. There was no way I could afford it. So for 2 months I picked up extra weekend shifts, cleaning a law firm on Saturdays and Sundays. I lived on peanut butter sandwiches and black coffee. When I finally bought the console and wrapped it, I was so tired I could barely see straight. But the look on his face when he opened it, that incandescent joy, it was worth every sleepless night. That was my salary. That was my reward. His college fund was a line item in my budget more important than food. I funneled every spare dollar into it. I turned down invitations from friends because a movie or dinner out was $5 that could go into that account. My world became small. My sacrifices invisible to everyone but me. I watched my son grow, my heart a confusing mix of pride and a quiet, persistent loneliness. When he and Tiffany announced their engagement, I gave them my blessing and my savings. They wanted a big, beautiful wedding. I wrote them a check that made my hands tremble, draining the account I had secretly labeled for my retirement. And then came the down payment on the house, the $60,000 gift that I now understood was just the first withdrawal in their long-term financial plan for my assets. "We'll pay you back, Mom," he promised, his arms around me. A hollow promise from a hollow man. I had been the foundation of his life, a foundation he now found to be old and cracked, ready to be bulldozed to make way for his new, shiny life with his wife. I looked around the apartment, filled with pictures of a boy I no longer recognized, and the fire in my belly began to burn. The grief had been a flash flood, but the anger was a slow-rising tide. The woman they thought was a pushover, a bottomless bank account, a free babysitter had just been washed away. And the woman left standing on the shore was a stranger, even to me. She was someone who was done giving. She was someone who was about to start taking back. I didn't move from Richard's armchair for the rest of the evening. The city lights began to sparkle outside my window, but I didn't turn on a lamp. I let the darkness wrap around me like a shroud. Mark's phone calls came and went, 3 of them in total, each one a jarring intrusion into the new cold silence of my life. I let them all go to voicemail. What could he possibly say? What lie could he spin that would patch the gaping hole he had just blasted through my heart? There were no more tears. The initial shock and the deep seismic pain had subsided, and in their place something else was forming. It was like watching water freeze. The turbulent emotions were slowly, molecule by molecule, hardening into a sheet of pure, unadulterated ice. My purpose, which for 3 decades had been soft and malleable and shaped entirely around my son, was now becoming sharp, clear, and dangerously pointed. My new purpose was survival and vengeance. They wanted to erase me from their lives, to phase me out like an old piece of furniture. They would do it slowly, politely, with 1,000 tiny cuts. A missed Sunday dinner here, an unanswered phone call there, until I was nothing but a distant twice-a-year obligation. All while they patiently waited for my assets, my home, my inheritance. I would not give them the satisfaction. I would not let them write the final chapter of my life. I would tear the book from their hands and write it myself. But I knew I was an amateur in a world of professionals. Mark was a banker. Tiffany was a marketing executive. They were fluent in the language of contracts and persuasion and manipulation. I was just a retired school administrator. My only weapons were a mother's intuition and a lifetime of scrimping and saving. It wasn't enough. I needed a general. I needed an arsenal. That's when the memory of David Chon surfaced from the deep recesses of my mind. Richard had always said, "David isn't just a lawyer, he's a chess player. He's always thinking 5 moves ahead." 5 moves ahead. That's exactly what I needed. My hands were surprisingly steady as I went to Richard's old desk and retrieved the address book. The house was completely dark, save for the faint glow of a streetlight filtering through the blinds. I found his number, my finger tracing the elegant, old-fashioned ink. I didn't care that it was late. Urgency was a fire in my veins. This could not wait for morning. The phone rang, each ring echoing the frantic beat of my own heart. I expected a voicemail. Instead, a crisp, awake voice answered on the 4th ring. "Chun." My own voice came out as a croak. "David? It's Evelyn. Evelyn Reed." The pause on the other end was brief but profound. I could hear him shifting, the professional part of his brain instantly clicking on. "Evelyn," he said. His voice was calm, a steady anchor in my storm. "It's late. Is everything all right?" "No," I said, the word a small broken thing. I took a breath, and the ice in my veins seemed to travel up into my voice, making it stronger, harder. "No, David, it's not. I need your help. It's an emergency." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "It's about my will, my property. And I need you to help me orchestrate a disappearing act." Another silence. This one was longer. It wasn't a silence of confusion, but of calculation. I knew in that moment I had made the right choice. He wasn't going to ask me if I was okay. He wasn't going to offer platitudes. He was already thinking 5 moves ahead. "My office. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. sharp," he said finally, his voice all business. "Don't speak to your son. Don't speak to his wife. Don't speak to anyone about this. Am I understood?" "Perfectly," I whispered, a single hot tear finally escaping and tracing a cold path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of relief. I wasn't alone. I had a plan. And now I had my general. As I hung up the phone, a grim smile touched my lips for the first time that day. Mark and Tiffany thought they were playing a simple game of chess against a pawn. They had no idea they had just declared war on a queen, and she was about to make her first move. In the bright, sterile light of David Chen's office the next morning, I laid out the ugly tapestry of my son's betrayal. I repeated the conversation I had overheard, my voice flat and emotionless, like a court reporter reading back testimony. I left nothing out, the insults, the condescension, the cold, calculating greed. David listened, his steepled fingers resting on his chin. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered something far better: validation. "This is a classic precursor to a competency challenge, Evelyn," he said, his voice grim. "They insult your intelligence, create a narrative of your decline, and then they try to seize control of your assets, for your own good. We need to move with surgical precision. And we need to move now." For the next few hours we plotted. We were 2 generals mapping out a campaign. Every document, every legal maneuver was a planned step in my liberation. I walked out of that office not as a grieving mother, but as a soldier armed for battle. That Sunday, I prepared for the dinner with the focus of an actress preparing for a lead role. The lemon meringue pie I baked was a masterpiece of deception, its fluffy white peaks hiding the bitter truth underneath. I chose my costume with care. A soft dove-gray cardigan, a simple necklace. I wanted to look gentle, unassuming, forgettable. The perfect picture of a woman who could be easily managed. The moment I stepped into their house, the performance began. Their home, which I had once tried so hard to love, now felt like an alien landscape. It was cold and minimalist, decorated in 50 shades of gray. It was a house with no soul, a perfect reflection of its owners. My grandchildren were my only warmth. "Grandma!" they squealed, and the honesty of their embrace was a sharp, painful contrast to the falseness that followed. Tiffany's hug was a whisper of expensive perfume and barely their contact. "Evelyn, you look comfortable," she said, her eyes giving my simple cardigan a once-over. It was a classic Tiffany compliment, a statement wrapped in a subtle insult. Mark's hug was that of a guilty man, quick and stiff. He busied himself with opening the wine, unable to look me in the eye for more than a second. The dinner was an agonizing ballet of pretense. I asked Mark about his promotion, and he launched into a self-important monologue about his new responsibilities, conveniently forgetting to mention the salary increase he'd alluded to on the phone call. I complimented Tiffany's roast chicken, which was, as always, dry enough to sand wood with. She accepted the praise as her due. I asked them about a nasty flu that was going around. "Oh, we never get sick," Tiffany declared, as if illness was a condition that only affected the lower classes. "We're very serious about our wellness." The most surreal moment came when Tiffany commented on my pie. "Oh, lemon. So many calories," she said with a little sigh. "But I suppose I'll have a tiny slice. For you." The condescension was breathtaking. Played my part. I smiled. I nodded. I asked the appropriate questions. I was the perfect, docile mother-in-law. And all the while I was watching them. I saw the quick, conspiratorial glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. I saw the impatience in Mark's eyes when I took too long to tell a story. I saw the greedy flicker in Tiffany's when the conversation briefly turned to the booming real estate market. Finally, as I was serving the pie, Mark cleared his throat. It was showtime. "Mom," he said, setting down his fork. "Tiffany and I have been talking." "That's nice, dear," I said, placing a generous slice of pie in front of him. "It's about the Tahoe cabin," he continued, plowing ahead. "We were thinking, since we're the only ones who really use it now, and the kids just love it so much, maybe we could work out a more formal arrangement." "A formal arrangement?" I asked, my voice trembling ever so slightly, a touch of elderly confusion for good measure. "Yeah," he said. "Like, maybe transferring the deed over to us. For estate planning purposes. It would save a lot of trouble with the inheritance down the road. It just simplifies things." Simplifies things. The same phrase he had used on the phone call. It was their mantra. Simplify. Remove the obstacle. Remove me. I looked at him, my son, so earnest and so false. I looked at his wife, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. I let a long, slow sigh escape my lips, the sigh of a woman weary of life's burdens. "Oh, Mark," I said, my voice soft and sad. "That cabin. It's everything I have left of your father. It's so much more than just a piece of property." I patted his hand. "It's a very big decision. You've given me a lot to think about." I watched the mask of concern on Tiffany's face tighten into a barely concealed frown of frustration. This was not the easy victory she had anticipated. She had expected me to fold, to gratefully hand over the keys to my life. As I drove home through the dark city streets, there was no sadness. There was only the cold, hard satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. The bait had been laid. They had taken it. The performance was over. Now it was time to spring the trap. The trap didn't take long to spring. 3 days later, on a Wednesday afternoon, my doorbell chimed. No call, no text. Just a sudden, imperious summons. I looked through the peephole and my stomach coiled into a tight knot. It was Tiffany, standing on my doormat with her arms crossed, tapping an impeccably manicured nail against her designer purse. She was here to escalate. She was here to close the deal. I smoothed my apron, took a calming breath, and opened the door. "Tiffany," I said, feigning a gentle surprise. "What brings you here? Is Mark with you?" "No, it's just me," she said, sweeping past me into my apartment with the entitlement of a queen visiting a peasant's hovel. Her eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of my living room, lingering for a moment on the worn-up upholstery of Richard's favorite armchair. I was getting a chemical peel in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by. We need to continue our conversation from Sunday. No pleasantries. No small talk. She was all business. The business of taking my assets. She sat on my sofa, crossing her long legs. "Evelyn," she began, her tone that of a patient adult explaining something to a difficult child. "I don't think you're fully appreciating the offer Mark and I are making. We are offering to take a significant financial burden off your plate. That cabin costs you thousands a year in taxes and upkeep. That's money you could be using for your comfort in your later years." The condescension was so thick I could have choked on it. My comfort. As if I were some doddering old fool who couldn't manage her own checkbook. "We're trying to help you, Evelyn," she continued, leaning forward. "We want to ensure your legacy, your inheritance for the children, is properly managed. Leaving a property like that in limbo is just fiscally irresponsible." I let her talk. I let her lay out her entire insulting case. I let her paint herself as the savvy, responsible daughter-in-law, and me as the sentimental, incompetent old woman who was a danger to her own financial health. She was so confident, so sure of her own superiority. She had no idea she was walking deeper and deeper into a minefield. When she finally paused, expecting me to be overwhelmed by her brilliant logic, I simply looked at her. I held her gaze until she started to shift uncomfortably. "You're very concerned about my finances, Tiffany," I said, my voice quiet. "And my legacy." "Of course," she said, a little too quickly. "We're family." "That's interesting," I continued, keeping my voice level, "because I've been thinking a lot about family lately, and about conversations. Specifically, the conversation you and Mark had last Tuesday. The one where he forgot to hang up the phone." It was as if I had flipped a switch. The confident, polished mask of Tiffany Reed shattered into a million pieces. The color drained from her face, leaving her expertly applied makeup looking like a death mask. Her mouth opened a perfect O of shock, but no sound came out. "What? I don't know what you're talking about," she finally managed to stammer, her eyes wide with a frantic, cornered animal look. "Oh, I think you do," I said. I stood up then, a strange sense of power surging through me. I was no longer the defendant in this conversation. I was the judge. I began to walk slowly toward her. "Let me refresh your memory," I said, my voice low and deliberate. "It started with you asking if it was his mother again. It moved on to a discussion of how unbearable I am, how torturous my dinners are." She flinched, physically recoiling on the sofa as if my words were stones. "And then," I continued, stopping directly in front of her, forcing her to look up at me, "you moved on to the main event. My cabin. The one I'm too old to need. The one that would be better off with you. The one you want to take out a loan against to finish your basement." I let the last detail hang in the air, a testament to her petty materialistic greed. She stared at me, speechless, her mind clearly racing as she tried to calculate the extent of the damage. For the first time since I had known her, Tiffany was not in control. "So don't you ever," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, but laced with all the fury I had suppressed for a week, "come into my home and talk to me about my comfort or my legacy. The only thing you're concerned with is how quickly you can get your hands on my money." She finally broke. She scrambled off the sofa, grabbing her purse, her movements jerky and panicked. "This is insane," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You're twisting things. This is a complete misunderstanding. I need to call Mark. He'll clear this up." "You do that," I said, stepping back to grant her a clear path to freedom. "You call your husband. You tell him the game is up." She fumbled with the doorknob and practically fled my apartment without a backward glance. I walked to the window and watched her hurry down the sidewalk, her head bent over her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I knew she wasn't just calling Mark to tell him what happened. She was calling him to plot their next move. But I would be ready. The queen had been checked. Now it was time to face the king. The hour that followed Tiffany's panicked departure was the quietest, most tense 60 minutes of my life. I knew he was coming. I made a pot of tea, my hands steady, and sat in my armchair waiting. The confrontation with Tiffany had been a preliminary skirmish. The real battle, the one that would determine the future, was with my son. When the doorbell buzzed, a sharp, angry sound, my heart didn't even flutter. I was calm. I was ready. I opened the door to find Mark standing there, looking exactly as I had pictured. His face was a thunderous mask of indignation, his expensive suit jacket rumpled. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stormed past me. "What the hell did you say to Tiffany?" he demanded, whirling to face me. "She called me, crying her eyes out. She said you accused her of the most horrible things." "Did I?" I asked calmly, closing the door. "Or did I simply repeat her own words back to her?" I gestured to the boxes in the corner, the ones he'd noticed before. "As you can see, I'm doing a little decluttering." The sight of the boxes seemed to fuel his anger. "Decluttering? What is wrong with you? First you're weird on Sunday, now you're attacking my wife and packing up your apartment like you're going somewhere. Are you having some kind of breakdown?" I walked past him and sat down in my chair. "No, Mark. I'm having an awakening. Sit down." My quiet command seemed to throw him off. He hesitated, then perched on the edge of the sofa, looking like a man who wanted to bolt at any second. "Tiffany was just trying to help," he said, his voice a little less aggressive now, shifting into a tone of strained reasonableness. "We are worried about you. The cabin is a big responsibility. We just thought." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "Just stop. I'm not interested in the story you've both concocted. I'm interested in the truth. And the truth is, I heard the phone call." He stared at me, his jaw working. "I already told you," he said through gritted teeth. "We were just venting. You're taking it out of context. It's not what it sounded like." "Then what did it sound like, Mark?" I pressed. "Did it sound like a son who loves and respects his mother? Or did it sound like a man who is tired of his mother, tired of her stories, tired of her presence in his life, and who is actively conspiring with his wife to take her property?" He jumped to his feet, pacing in front of the fireplace like a caged tiger. "This is ridiculous. I'm a good son. I do everything right. I call you every week. We have you over for dinner. What more do you want from me?" The raw entitlement in his voice was staggering. He wasn't seeing his actions as a betrayal. He was seeing my reaction as an unreasonable demand. "What did I want?" I said, my own voice rising to meet his. "I wanted the boy I raised from the ashes of his father's death. The boy I worked my fingers to the bone for so he could have a life better than mine. I wanted a man who would stand up and say, 'Don't you dare talk about my mother that way.' But that man doesn't exist, does he? He was replaced by a weak, grasping man who just says, 'Yeah, you're probably right that.'" I threw his own words back at him and they hit him like a slap. He stopped pacing and glared at me, his face turning a dark, mottled red. "You want to talk about sacrifice?" he spat, his voice dripping with years of stored-up resentment. "My whole life has been one long monument to your sacrifice. You never let me forget it. Every good grade, every promotion, it was never my success, it was a return on your investment. You use your sacrifice like a weapon to make me feel guilty." The accusation stunned me. My love, my support, he saw it as a burden, a transaction. "You suffocate us, Mom," he shouted, his control finally snapping. "Maybe Tiffany has a point. You're always here, always needing something. Always with your little suggestions and your judging eyes about our parenting, our spending, our lives. It's exhausting. Life would be so much simpler without having to worry about you all the time." There it was. The unvarnished truth. Not a slip of the tongue on a hot mic, but a primal scream from the heart. My presence, my very existence, was a complication in his life. And he wanted to simplify. A profound, bottomless sadness washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of my anger. It was over. The son I loved was truly gone, replaced by this bitter, resentful stranger. "Then I will make your life simpler," I said, my voice flat and empty. He must have heard the finality in my tone, because his rage suddenly evaporated, replaced by a look of panic. He had finally pushed me too far and he knew it. "Mom, look, I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "Get out," I whispered. "Let's just calm down and talk about this." "There is nothing left to talk about," I said, standing up. "Get out of my house." He saw the look in my eyes and knew there was no arguing. He backed toward the door, then stopped, his expression hardening into something ugly and calculating. He was cornered and now he was lashing out. "You know what? You're being completely irrational," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You're clearly not well. Making emotional decisions, packing boxes, accusing people of things. A lawyer might have something to say about that. Maybe you're not fit to be making financial decisions on your own anymore. Tiffany and I are just concerned. We might have to step in and manage things for you, for your own protection." The threat was unmistakable. He was going to use my grief and my anger against me. He was going to try to have me declared legally incompetent. He was going to steal my life and call it an act of love. I stared at the stranger in my doorway, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear resolve. He thought he was delivering the final blow. He had no idea he had just handed me my sword and shield. He had just given me permission to do whatever it took to save myself. The slam of the door was like a starter pistol firing at the beginning of a race. A race against time. Mark's threat wasn't idle. It was a clear and present danger. He and Tiffany would move fast, contacting a lawyer, trying to build a case that I was an unstable old woman who needed to be managed. I had to move faster. The next 2 days were a masterclass in controlled chaos. I operated on pure adrenaline, fueled by black coffee and the cold fire of self-preservation. There was no time for grief, no time for second-guessing. There was only the plan. My first call, placed from a payphone 2 blocks away, I was already thinking like a fugitive, was to David Chan. I relayed Mark's threat, my voice devoid of emotion. "He's going to try and have me declared incompetent, David. He's going to try and freeze my assets." "Let him try," David said, his voice a bomb of calm professionalism. "He's a banker, Evelyn, not a legal strategist. He just showed his entire hand. We're already prepared for this." David, true to his word, was my field marshal, directing the battle from his downtown office. That very afternoon, he sent me to a forensic psychiatrist, a woman with kind eyes and a will of iron. For 2 hours, she put me through a battery of cognitive tests and a thorough psychological evaluation. At the end, she smiled. "You're not just competent, Mrs. Reed," she said, signing the official affidavit with a flourish. "You're one of the sharpest 65-year-olds I've ever met." That notarized document went straight into David's files, a legal silver bullet waiting for my son's attack. Next, we built the financial fortress. The sale of my apartment was fast-tracked. The cash offer was a godsend. While the paperwork was being processed, David finalized the creation of the LLC. It had a name so boring and generic it was practically invisible. Midwest Holdings Group. My life savings, the proceeds from my apartment sale, every penny I had to my name was about to be funneled into a corporate account in Delaware. A ghost in the financial machine. Evelyn Reed's personal bank accounts would soon show a balance of less than $5,000. Enough for daily life, but not enough to be worth fighting over. The final piece of legal armor was the trust for the Tahoe cabin. I signed the documents in David's office, the thick, creamy paper cool beneath my fingers. As my pen flowed across the signature line, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The cabin, my sanctuary of memories, was now legally untouchable. It belonged to the trust and the trust belonged to me. It was safe. While David handled the legal and financial warfare, I focused on the ground campaign. My friend Sarah became my loyal lieutenant. She arrived the next morning, her face set with grim determination, carrying a stack of boxes. "All right, General," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "Where do we start?" We were ruthless. We sorted through 65 years of life with the efficiency of professional movers. Every object was put on trial. A photo of Mark's first birthday? It went into the single precious vanish box that would come with me. The set of crystal glasses Tiffany had given me for Christmas 2 years ago? They went straight into the donate pile with a satisfying clatter. Richard's beloved leather armchair? It was carefully wrapped and destined for a climate-controlled storage unit Sarah had rented in her own name, paid for in cash. No paper trail. We worked for 2 days straight, the apartment slowly emptying out, becoming a hollow shell of its former self. As we packed, we talked. Sarah was my confessor, my sounding board. "Are you scared?" she asked me once as we were wrapping my mother's old china plates in newspaper. "No," I answered, and I was surprised to find that it was the truth. I'm not scared. I'm liberated. For the first time since Richard died, I'm making a decision that is purely for me. Not for Mark, not for the memory of my husband. For me. By Friday afternoon, the work was done. The apartment was an echo chamber of memories. The movers were scheduled for Monday to take the donations and the storage items. The closing on the sale was set for Tuesday. All the pieces were in place. All except one. The most painful, the most necessary, the most heartbreaking piece of the entire operation. I had to say goodbye to Lily and Leo, and I had to do it without letting them or their parents know it was forever. The thought of leaving my grandchildren was a physical pain, a constant dull ache behind my ribs. They were the only casualties in this war I was waging, two innocent children caught in the crossfire. If I could have built a life where I could see them without their parents, I would have. But I knew Mark and Tiffany would use them as leverage, as bait, as a weapon to control me. To be free, I had to lose them. The cruelty of that choice was not lost on me. But I would not leave them with nothing. I would not let their last memory of me be of a grandmother who simply vanished into thin air. I would give them a final perfect memory, and a secret to hold on to. I drove to their school on that Friday afternoon, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. The plan was simple, the execution excruciating. The school secretary smiled, waved me through, and a moment later, they were running toward me, their faces alight with pure, uncomplicated love. Grandma! I hugged them, burying my face in their hair, trying to brand the memory of this moment onto my soul. I have a top-secret mission for you too, I whispered, and their eyes grew wide with conspiratorial glee. It involves a surprise trip to our special place. 5 minutes later, we were seated in a bright red booth at Angelo's ice cream parlor. As they dug into their sundaes, their faces smeared with chocolate and whipped cream, I tried to drink in every detail. The way Leo swung his legs impatiently under the table. The way Lily carefully ate all the sprinkles first. The sound of their laughter. I was a woman hoarding memories for a long cold winter. So Grandma, Lily said, looking at me with those wise old soul eyes of hers. What's the secret mission? My own carefully prepared ice cream sat melting in its dish. I reached into my purse and pulled out the 2 small velvet boxes. I slid one across the table to each of them. This is the mission, I said, my voice thick. This is a very important gift. It's a secret that only the 3 of us share. They opened the boxes with trembling, excited fingers. Inside, nestled on the white satin, were the silver necklaces. 2 halves of a single heart. They fit together, Leo gasped, holding his piece up to Lily's. Exactly, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Your half and your sister's half. So that no matter where you are, no matter how far away I am, you will always have a piece of each other. And you will know that my heart is always with you both. It's a magic necklace. It connects us. Leo was thrilled, immediately demanding I help him fasten his around his neck. But Lily was quiet. She traced the smooth, curved edge of her pendant with her finger, her expression serious. She looked up from the necklace and her eyes met mine. The question was there before she even spoke it. You're going away, aren't you, Grandma? She asked, her voice small. The truth felt like broken glass in my throat. I couldn't tell her everything, but I couldn't lie to her either. Not to her. I have to go on a long trip, my sweet girl, I said, reaching across the table to take her small hand. A very important adventure. And I'm not sure when I'll be back. Leo's happy expression crumbled. But, what about Sunday dinners? What about my birthday next month? His lower lip began to tremble. Oh, my love, I said, my heart breaking into a million pieces. I slid out of the booth and went to their side, gathering them both into my arms, the smell of chocolate and childhood innocence filling my senses for the last time. I will be thinking of you on your birthday. I will be thinking of you every single day. You are the best things that have ever happened to me. Never ever forget that. Promise me. They both nodded, their faces buried in my shoulders. I walked them back to the school's front entrance just as a familiar black SUV pulled up to the curb. Mark. He saw me standing there with the kids, and his face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. Confusion, suspicion, and then a flash of pure anger. He put the car in park and started to open his door, his mouth forming my name. It was my signal to leave. I gave each child one last hard squeeze and a quick kiss on the forehead. Be good. I love you more than words. Then I turned and walked away, not looking back. I didn't run. I walked with a deliberate, steady pace. Even as I heard Mark calling my name, his voice getting closer. I got into my car, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb without a single glance in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. If I had seen their faces one more time, I would have broken. I would have stayed. And that was a price I could no longer afford to pay. I drove away from that school with a gaping hole in my heart, but with a chilling certainty about the path I was on. Mark's angry, confused face was the last image I had of my son, and it was a fitting one. He was a man who had lost control, and he was about to find out just how completely he had lost it. For the next few weeks, I existed in a self-imposed exile at Sarah's house. I was a ghost in her guest room, while she acted as my eyes and ears, my scout on the other side of the battle line. The reports she brought back each evening were both grimly satisfying and deeply disturbing. The first wave of fallout was exactly as I predicted. Mark had apparently gone ballistic after I'd driven away from the school. He'd grilled the children. What did Grandma say? Where did she take you? What did she give you? To their credit, Lily and Leo held on to their secret. They just said I'd bought them ice cream and told them I was going on a trip. Then came the barrage of calls and texts to my dead phone number. Sarah, using a burner phone, had even checked my old voicemail. It was a chaotic mix of Mark's angry demands, followed by wheedling, manipulative messages filled with fake concern. Mom, please call me. We're worried sick. This isn't like you. The real panic set in on Tuesday, the day of the closing. Mark had driven to my apartment, probably to stage some kind of intervention, only to be met in the hallway by the new owner, Dr. Evans, who was directing movers with a new sofa. Sarah's neighbor, a notorious gossip, had called her with a breathless blow-by-blow account. Mark had been livid. Who are you? What are you doing in my mother's apartment? He had demanded. Dr. Evans, a calm, distinguished-looking man, had simply replied, I'm the new owner. I bought this apartment from Mrs. Reed. The sale closed this morning. He'd even shown Mark a copy of the deed. According to the neighbor, Mark had just stood there, speechless, his face white with shock and rage. He had finally been outmaneuvered. He had lost the first piece on the chessboard. His next stop was predictable: David Chin's office. He had apparently tried to storm in, but David's formidable secretary had stopped him in his tracks. David had eventually agreed to see him for 5 minutes. Mark had demanded to know where I was, to see the sale documents, to know where the money had gone. David had coolly informed him that he represented his client, Evelyn Reed, that she was of sound mind and body, and that all her affairs were in order and strictly confidential. He had then shown Mark the door. This is when the second, more poisonous phase of their campaign began. Defeated in their attempts at direct control, they turned to slander. The Facebook posts were the opening salvo, painting me as a confused, mentally fragile old woman who had wandered away. But the real venom was spread behind the scenes. Tiffany took the lead. She began a systematic telephone campaign to dismantle my reputation and poison my entire social network. She started with our mutual friends. Sarah was one of the first she called, a calculated move to see what my closest friend knew. Sarah recounted the conversation to me, her voice tight with fury. Tiffany had been a master performer, her voice choked with fake tears. She told Sarah that my decline had been rapid, that I had become paranoid, that I was having episodes. She'd invented a story about me, accusing them of stealing Richard's old watch. A complete fabrication. We were trying to get her to see a doctor, Sarah. Tiffany had sobbed. We were so worried. And then she just vanished. She must have gotten confused and wandered off. We're terrified she's been targeted by some scammer who's taken all her money. It was a brilliant, evil strategy. It explained the sale of the apartment. It explained my disappearance. And it painted them as the heroic, long-suffering children, and me as the crazy, ungrateful mother. The poison spread quickly. A few days later, Sarah received a call from another friend from our old book club. A woman named Carol. Oh, Sarah, isn't it just tragic about Evelyn? Carol had said, her voice dripping with pity. Those poor children, Mark and Tiffany. They're handling it with such grace. I can't imagine how difficult it must be to watch your own mother lose her mind. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. They weren't just trying to find me. They were salting the earth of my entire past. They were ensuring that if I ever did try to resurface, I would be met not with welcome, but with suspicion and pity. I would be poor Evelyn, the crazy old woman who had lost her grip on reality. They had taken my son, they had tried to take my home, and now they were stealing my name, my story, my very sanity in the eyes of everyone I had ever known. They were ensuring my exile was absolute. The first 6 months were the hardest. I left Chicago under the cloak of darkness, Sarah driving me to the airport for a pre-dawn flight. We didn't say much. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. As I walked toward the security gate, I didn't look back. Evelyn Reed was a ghost, and it was time for her to fade away. I landed in Sarasota, Florida, as Lena Martin. I had a new driver's license, a new bank account, and a new life to build from scratch. The first few weeks were a lonely blur of unpacking boxes and navigating a new city. Every time the phone rang in my rented condo, my heart would leap. A foolish, conditioned response, before I remembered that no one knew my number. The silence was a heavy blanket. Some nights, the loneliness was so acute it felt like a physical illness. I would sit on the lanai, listening to the chirping tree frogs, and wonder if I had made a terrible mistake. But with the loneliness came something else I hadn't felt in decades: freedom. There were no expectations. No Sunday dinners to orchestrate. No one's feelings to manage but my own. I could wake up and decide to spend the entire day reading on the beach, and no one would know or care. The feeling was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Slowly, cautiously, Lena Martin began to take shape. I sold the rental and bought the small, seafoam green bungalow with the sprawling bougainvillea vine climbing its walls. I started taking long walks at sunrise on Siesta Key Beach, marveling at the dolphins that would often swim parallel to the shore. The salt in the air felt like it was cleansing me, washing away the grime of my old life. I joined a community art center and signed up for a watercolor class, a long dormant dream. My first paintings were clumsy and amateurish, but I loved the feel of the brush in my hand, the way the colors bled into each other on the wet paper. I painted the things that brought me peace: the fiery sunsets over the Gulf, the gnarled branches of the mangrove trees, the comical prehistoric-looking pelicans that perched on the pier. And I began to make friends. It happened organically, in small, quiet ways. I met Maria at the art center, a retired nurse with a wicked sense of humor and a passion for mystery novels. I met George at the local fish market, a widower who taught me the difference between grouper and snapper, and eventually convinced me to join his weekly fishing group. They were kind, interesting people who knew nothing of Mark or Tiffany or the life I had fled. They knew me simply as Lena, the quiet woman who painted sunsets. For the first time, my identity wasn't tied to being a wife, a mother, or a grandmother. It was just mine. My secret connection to my grandchildren was the one thread that tied me to my past. The monthly ritual of writing and receiving their letters was my anchor. I would read their words over and over, trying to decipher the unwritten truths between the lines. I celebrated their triumphs from afar and ached with their struggles, a loving ghost watching over their lives. Then came the day of the art festival in St. Augustine, 3 years into my new life. The moment I heard Tiffany's voice, my carefully constructed piece shattered. Seeing them so close and yet a universe away was a torment. I hid behind a potter's stall, my heart pounding, a spectator at my own family's life. I watched them, my grandchildren who were growing up so fast, becoming people I barely recognized. And then I saw it. The glint of silver at Lily's throat. The half-heart necklace. It was a beacon in the darkness. A secret signal that only I could understand. It meant that despite the years, despite the distance, despite the lies their parents had undoubtedly told them, our bond had not been broken. They remembered. They still held on. Tears streamed down my face as I watched them disappear into the bustling crowd. But these were not the tears of a lonely, grieving woman. They were tears of a fierce, unyielding hope. They hadn't forgotten me. They couldn't have. That tiny, shining piece of silver wasn't just jewelry. It was a promise. A promise that one day this unbearable distance would come to an end. It gave me the strength to return to my quiet life in Sarasota and continue to wait for the day that promise could be fulfilled. My quiet life in Sarasota continued for another 6 months, a peaceful routine of painting, walking on the beach, and cherishing the letters that were my only link to Lily and Leo. I had found a measure of contentment. I had accepted my role as a distant, loving ghost in their lives. I thought this was how it would be forever. I was wrong. The phone call from David Chan came on a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week my old life had imploded. The moment I saw his name on the caller ID, I knew something was wrong. David only called when there was significant news. "Lena," he said, his voice stripped of its usual professional warmth. It was the voice of a man delivering bad news. "There's been an accident. A bad one. It's Mark." The world tilted on its axis. My carefully constructed peace evaporated in an instant. All the anger, all the resentment, all the years of pain vanished, replaced by a single primal fear. The fear of a mother for her child. "Is he?" I couldn't bring myself to say the word. "He's alive," David said quickly, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "But it's serious, Evelyn. A drunk driver ran a red light. It was a multi-car pileup on the Eisenhower Expressway. He's in the ICU at Northwestern Memorial. They're saying multiple surgeries, a long recovery. A very long road." I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter, my knuckles turning white. Mark. My Mark. Lying broken in a hospital bed. Every instinct screamed at me to get on a plane, to be there, to hold his hand, to tell the doctors to do whatever it took. But I couldn't. Evelyn Reed was dead. And Lena Martin had no son. "And the children?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "They weren't with him, thank God," David said. "Tiffany is with them. Sarah has been in touch with a mutual friend. Apparently Tiffany is not handling it well. She's overwhelmed, and she's terrified about the cost." Of course she was. The cost. Even in a crisis, that would be her first thought. After I hung up, I couldn't paint. I couldn't walk on the beach. I just sat on my porch, staring sightlessly at the brilliant blue sky, my mind a chaotic storm of conflicting emotions. There was the terrified mother, who wanted to rush to her son's side. And there was the wounded woman, who remembered the cold, cruel words of betrayal. He had wished my presence out of his life. How could I possibly re-enter it now? But then I thought of Lily and Leo, my innocent grandchildren. Their father was gravely injured. Their mother was falling apart. And I knew, with a certainty that cut through my own pain, that they were about to face the financial ruin their parents had so narrowly avoided years ago. Their father's salary was gone, replaced by a mountain of medical debt. Their world was about to be turned upside down. And I would not let that happen. My anger at Mark and Tiffany was a towering wall. But my love for my grandchildren was an ocean. And it was about to sweep that wall away. I called David back that afternoon. My voice was no longer trembling. It was resolute. "David," I said, "we have to help them." "I thought you might say that," he replied. "But how, Lena? If you send money, they'll know it's you. Mark and Tiffany will see it as an opening. They'll use it to try and track you down. They'll see it as a sign that you're weakening." "They won't know it's me," I said, the plan forming in my mind, a wild, audacious piece of benevolent deception. "They won't hear from Evelyn Reed. They're going to hear from the ghost of Richard Reed." It took us a week of careful covert work. David used his network of contacts, calling in favors. An old colleague in the insurance industry helped create a convincing backdated paper trail. A trust was established with an obscure bank in a different state. Then, a thick, official-looking envelope was sent via registered mail to Tiffany. Inside, she found a letter from a firm she'd never heard of. It informed her that a thorough audit had uncovered a long-dormant insurance policy held by her late father-in-law, Richard Reed. This policy contained a rarely used family catastrophe rider, designed to protect his heir's children in the event of the heir's incapacitation. The beneficiaries of this fund were not Mark, but Lily and Leo Reed. The fund was generous enough to cover all of Mark's medical bills, plus a monthly stipend for the children's expenses, to be administered by a neutral third-party trustee, David Chan. It was a perfect, compassionate lie. A gift from a ghost. I was shielding my family from the shadows, using the money they had tried to steal from me to save them from themselves. It was the ultimate irony. But as I authorized the first transfer of funds, I realized this wasn't just an act of grace. It was an opportunity. An opening. It was the first step in a new, riskier plan to not just watch over my grandchildren, but to finally, after 4 long years, speak to them again. The miracle inheritance from Richard's ghost had the exact effect I had hoped for. It was a financial deus ex machina that swooped in and saved Mark and Tiffany from the brink of ruin. Sarah reported that Tiffany, in between frantic trips to the hospital, had told everyone who would listen about her sainted late father-in-law who was still looking out for them from beyond the grave. The irony was so thick it was almost comical. The money stabilized their chaotic world, which meant Lily and Leo's lives were stabilized. That was all that mattered to me. For months I watched from the sidelines, receiving updates from David about Mark's slow, painful recovery, and from Sarah about how the kids were coping. They were resilient as children often are, but I knew they were scared. I could feel their fear across the 1,000 miles that separated us. The letters felt inadequate, a flimsy substitute for the comfort only a grandmother could give. The urge to hear their voices became a constant, undeniable ache. The risk was enormous. A phone call was a tangible link, far more dangerous than an anonymous letter. But the accident had changed my perspective. Life was fleeting. I had already lost 4 years with them. I wasn't willing to lose any more. So the plan for Operation Lifeline was born. It was simple, low-tech, and relied on the element of surprise. I purchased 2 basic, no-frills prepaid phones, burner phones, as the kids would call them. I activated them with numbers from a different state and programmed only one number into each. My own secret prepaid cell number. I didn't even save it under a name. It was just a number. I shipped the phones, along with chargers and a handwritten letter for each child, to Sarah. She was my operative on the ground, and she understood the delicate nature of the mission. She waited for a Saturday afternoon when she knew Tiffany was at a lengthy physical therapy session with Mark. She drove to their quiet suburban street, slipped the 2 small, padded envelopes into their mailbox, and drove away. My letter to Lily was a plea from the heart. My dearest Lily, I know how brave you've been since your dad's accident. I am so incredibly proud of you. I am sending you this gift because sometimes a letter just isn't enough. This phone is a secret key just for you and me and Leo. It has only one number in it, my number. It's a secret lifeline you can use anytime you need to talk. When you're sad, when you're scared, when you just want to tell me about your day. For now, this must be our secret. It's the only way. I love you more than all the grains of sand on all the beaches in the world. Forever your grandma. Once the package was delivered, an agonizing wait began. My own little flip phone sat on the counter, a silent sentinel. Every time it chirped with a spam text, my heart leaped. I second-guessed myself 1,000 times. Was this a mistake? Was I putting the children in a difficult position? For 2 days there was nothing. I started to despair. Maybe they were too scared to use the phones. Maybe they had shown them to Tiffany. Then on the 3rd night, as I was washing my dinner dishes, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I fumbled to answer it, my hands wet and soapy. Hello, I said, my voice breathless. A small, hesitant voice answered. Grandma. It was Lily. The sound of her voice, older and yet so achingly familiar, broke through my composure. Tears streamed down my face, mingling with the dishwater on my hands. Oh, Lily. My sweet girl. It's me. We both started crying then, a messy, tearful reunion over a crackling phone line. I miss you so much, she sobbed. I thought I'd never hear your voice again. I'm here now, sweetie, I choked out. I'm here. We talked for over an hour that first night. It was like opening a floodgate. She told me about her dad's struggles, how he was often angry and frustrated with his slow progress. She told me about her mom's constant stress. And she told me about school, about her friends, about a book she was reading. She told me she still wore the necklace every single day, tucked under her shirt. Leo called the next day, his voice a whirlwind of energy. Grandma, Lily said it was really you. Did you really send us phones? This is so cool. Are you a spy now? His childish innocence was a balm to my soul. The secret calls became the new rhythm of my life. They were my secret joy, a lifeline back to the world I had been forced to leave. They would call me on their way home from school, or from their bedrooms at night, whispering so their mom couldn't hear. I became their confidant, their secret keeper. I was no longer a ghost. I was a voice, a presence, a secret grandmother they could count on. But with every cherished conversation, I knew this clandestine existence couldn't last forever. It was a temporary bridge, and it was time to see if that bridge could bear the weight of the whole family on my terms. For 2 months our secret lifeline thrived. The calls were a precious clandestine joy, a way for me to be a grandmother again. But the secrecy began to weigh on me. I was asking my grandchildren 11 and 13 to carry a heavy burden, to lie to their mother every single day. And I knew with a growing certainty that it wasn't sustainable. It wasn't fair to them. Mark was now home from the rehabilitation facility, confined mostly to a wheelchair but slowly regaining his strength. He was a constant presence in their lives again. The time for secrets was over. It was time for a reckoning. It was time to bring my existence out of the shadows and into the harsh light of day, but only under conditions that I alone would dictate. Writing the letter to Mark was like performing surgery on my own heart. I drafted it, redrafted it, and then rewrote it again. Every word had to be perfect, every sentence a brick in the new wall of boundaries I was about to build. This wasn't a letter of forgiveness. It was a non-negotiable contract. I sent the final version to David, who had it delivered by a legal courier to Mark's house. I imagined the crisp, official envelope landing in his hands, a missive from a ghost. It began without a single word of greeting or affection. Mark, it has been 4 years. 4 years since I learned that my only son considered me a burden, and was actively planning to strip me of my dignity and my property. The choice I made to disappear was not made out of confusion or instability, as you and Tiffany so cruelly suggested to the world. It was a calculated act of self-preservation, forced upon me by your betrayal. I am not writing to you now out of a desire for reconciliation. Frankly, I believe the relationship between a mother and the son who did what you did is irreparably broken. The man I loved and sacrificed for ceased to exist for me on that day. I am writing for one reason and one reason only. Lily and Leo. They are innocent. They deserve to have a grandmother. Through a private arrangement, I have been speaking with them for the past 2 months. They should not have to sneak around to talk to the woman who loves them more than life itself. Their emotional well-being is my absolute priority. For their sake, I am willing to establish a new framework for our family. This is not a negotiation. These are the terms. Your acceptance must be total and unequivocal. The list that followed was cold, clear, and absolute. 1. My anonymity is non-negotiable. You and Tiffany will cease all efforts, direct or indirect, to discover my location, my new name, or any details of my current life. Any attempt to do so will result in my immediate and permanent silence. 2. My assets are my own. All of my financial affairs, including the Tahoe Cabin Trust and my personal savings, are under my sole control. There will be no further discussion of my will, my inheritance, or my financial competency, ever. 3. Communication will be structured and limited. Our relationship as adults is over. My relationship is with my grandchildren. I will communicate with you only on matters pertaining to them. 4. My access to the children will be unfettered. In exchange for your adherence to these rules, I will establish regular, scheduled video calls with Lily and Leo. You will facilitate these calls without comment or interference. 5. Their future is secured. I will be formalizing and expanding the educational fund I have established for the children. This will be managed by David Chin's office, and is contingent on your full cooperation with all other terms. This is the only offer you will receive. It is not an invitation to discuss the past or beg for a forgiveness I am not prepared to give. It is a practical, forward-looking solution for the children. You have 1 week to provide your unconditional acceptance through David Chen. If I do not hear from you, or if you attempt to argue any of these points, I will vanish again, and this time you will not hear from me until the children are legal adults. Evelyn. I signed my birth name, a name I hadn't used in years. It was an act of reclaiming my own identity. The wait for his response was agonizing. 5 days later, a thick package arrived in David's inbox. It was a scan of a 5-page handwritten letter from Mark. David forwarded it to me without comment. It was a pathetic, rambling mess. It was filled with self-pity, with excuses about his financial desperation, with blame cast on Tiffany's ambition, and with long, flowery paragraphs about his unbearable guilt. He wrote that not a day went by that he didn't regret his horrible, stupid words. He begged me to find it in my heart to forgive him. I read the entire thing and I felt nothing. It was the letter of a man who was sorry he got caught, Not a man who truly understood the depth of his betrayal. My response, sent back through David the same day, was brutally short. Mark, I acknowledge receipt of your letter. It changes nothing. My terms are not a starting point for negotiation. They are the entire negotiation. Unconditional acceptance. Yes or no? 2 days later, David received a one-sentence email from Mark. I accept all of her terms. He had finally understood. He had no cards left to play. The son who had tried to erase his mother was now begging her to be a part of his children's lives. Under a set of rules she had written from 1,000 miles away. The power had shifted completely and irrevocably. The first video call felt like a diplomatic summit between two warring nations. My screen blinked to life and there they were, arranged on the sofa in their living room. Lily and Leo were in the center, their faces beaming, waving frantically at the screen. Grandma! Grandma! Behind them on either side sat their parents. Mark, leaning heavily on a cane that rested against the sofa, looked thin and worn. He gave a small, hesitant nod. Tiffany sat ramrod straight, her hands clenched in her lap, her face a carefully blank canvas. They were chaperones in their own home, silent observers at my reunion. "Hello, my loves," I said, a joyful sob catching in my throat. My hair was short and silver now, my face tanned by the Florida sun. I was not the woman they remembered, the sad, quiet grandmother from Chicago. I was Lena, and for the first time I was letting them see me. That first call was awkward and beautiful. Lily showed me a painting she had done for art class. Leo introduced me to their new puppy, a little terrier mix who yapped excitedly at the screen. Mark and Tiffany said nothing. They simply watched, adhering to the first rule of our new treaty. The calls became our weekly ritual. Every Saturday at 10 a.m., we would connect. The tension slowly eased. Mark and Tiffany began to relax, sometimes even offering a quiet hello at the beginning of the call. I learned about Mark's painful physical therapy, about Tiffany's new, less stressful job. They learned nothing about me. My background on the video call was always a plain, neutral wall. My new life was my own. And now, 6 months after that first call, the final phase of my plan is in motion. I am standing on my screened-in porch in Sarasota, a mug of coffee warming my hands. The sun is just beginning to peek over the horizon, setting the sky on fire with strokes of brilliant pink and gold. The air is warm and thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and salt from the nearby Gulf. It is peaceful. It is my sanctuary, and soon I will share it. In a few hours, a rental car will pull into my driveway. Inside will be my friend Sarah, and next to her 2 sleepy, excited children. Yesterday, Mark drove Lily and Leo 2 hours north to a hotel in Orlando. It was the furthest he was allowed to go. He hugged them goodbye in the hotel lobby, under Sarah's watchful eye, and handed their suitcases over. Then, as per our agreement, he got back in his car and drove home to Chicago. He does not know my city. He does not know my street. He does not know the name on my mailbox. He only knows that for the next 3 days, his children belong to me. Their rooms are ready. I've laid out new swimsuits on their beds and stocked the pantry with their favorite cereals and snacks. A set of professional-grade watercolors sits on a small easel for Lily. A new book on the great white shark lies on the nightstand for Leo. We will walk on the beach and collect seashells. We will build a sandcastle. We will eat ice cream. I will take them to see the manatees at the local aquarium. We will sit on this very porch as the sun sets, and I will tell them stories. Not the boring stories their mother once scorned, but stories about my travels, about the friends I've made, about the woman I became when I was finally free to be myself. I will not speak ill of their parents, but if they ask me why I left, I will tell them the truth, in a way their young hearts can understand. I will tell them I had to leave to find my own peace. My journey here was born from the deepest pain a mother can endure. The betrayal I suffered almost broke me, but it didn't. Instead, it cracked me open and forced me to rebuild myself piece by piece, into a stronger, more authentic version of myself. The son who tried to erase me instead gave me the gift of a blank page. And on it, I have written a life of my own choosing. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It wasn't easy to tell, but it's important for women like us to share our truths. I have a question for you all. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to protect your own dignity? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you love to save yourself? Please, share your story in the comments below. Let's remind each other that we are not alone, and that it's never ever too late to start over. If my story resonated with you, please give this video a like, and subscribe for more stories from people just like us. You are stronger than you think.